Welcome to the Promethean Tides Aftershow, everyone. I am General, and as always, I am joined by Breaker. What's going on, Breaker?
Philosophy, categorical imperatives.
All right, yeah. I thought I'd start the show midway between this conversation because seems like a good place to start it. So, all right. My position is that when it comes to someone like a Kant or a Descartes or I don't know, fuck it, a Nietzsche, uh, these are all people who have human ideas about human things, about how the world ought work under human conceptualizations, and I think that they can get very close to the truth, but I think that all of these ideas must be inherently flawed because uh, shit, man, they're just human conceptions. Human beings are not perfect beings. We are flawed, and we have limited knowledge. So the ideas that we come up with, they are not perfections. There is no perfect human idea. There is no crystallized human idea. It is just kind of like hunches that mankind has. And therefore, although they are important and they're definitely worth thinking and talking about, uh, they they're not something that you have faith in, right? They're just human ideas. That's it. Like lots of people have ideas.
You know what the main problem with that is? That's like the epistemological minded person's main rebuttal to this is. It's like, okay, I'm going to ask you a very simple question. Like, you explicitly just said that's like humans' notions of absolute reality are flawed because they themselves are not perfect beings. Now, when you say that, pay very close attention. Like you are making an appeal to a higher transcendental form of perfection that you explicitly just said humans are incapable of interfacing with to a sufficient level to pass your particular ideological muster. Now, it is incumbent on you at the end of this to describe to me and everyone else what exactly is this ultimate transcendent perfection that you think humans are not fully capable of engaging with.
Yeah, I'm not even sure if that exists. What I know is that human beings we deal with absolutes. We like mathematics, for instance. So we'd say yes, 100% of the time 5 plus 5 equals 10, and we just know that. That's known. We like dealing in concrete knowledge. We like for things to be known and that we can place that down as a concrete cinder block on which we can build the rest of our knowledge. We like that, right? I'm not saying that there is actually such a thing as a concrete cinder block that you can build knowledge off of. I'm agnostic as to whether that exists or not, but I know that human beings tend to like to work with concrete cinder blocks in this metaphor. They like to work in absolute knowledge. So that's my critique, really. Now, what I think is actually going on is that we exist in a highly competitive ecosystem. The economy is the society, the culture. It's all just an ecosystem, right? And it's a very bizarre and weird ecosystem that really we've never seen in the past 4 billion years of the Earth, but still an ecosystem. And ultimately, life, it doesn't care about truth. Ecosystems, they don't care about truth. They care about what works. They care about pragmatism. So when people start talking about metaphysics, about God, I go, I mean, sure, but ultimately that just seems like a human conception to me, right? If there were to be a God, And this isn't a this wouldn't be a supernatural god. It would be a purely natural god. But if there were to be a god, the closest thing, definitionally speaking, that I could think of would be the system that seems to control all ecosystems. And that thing, that is nature. And so that's why I say, I believe that, well, when it comes to this definition of God, in my entirely empirical understanding of the universe, what is the closest entity that I can think of to what a god would be? Well, it's nature. Is it supernatural? No. Is it conscious? Probably not. But it's the closest thing to a god that I can possibly think of, that I think is actually real. And so that's why I say, yeah, fuck it. Nature is God. But I don't think that it's omnipotent. I don't think that it's omniscient. It's just a force that exists that we can never overcome, because we were born from it and we will die from it. And so that is my perspective.
Well, you see, you have a problem in that, from my perspective, and that, as you defined it, the thing under which all ecosystems are ultimately possible, you're not necessarily describing a purely naturalist and material and physical force. What you're actually describing in that particular instance is combinatorics, which by its very nature is necessarily metaphysical. Because in combinatorics, you cannot so easily bind it through finite decimals and algorithms. As you and I both know and have talked about many times, combinatorics isn't a very ruly form of mathematics.
That's like saying that that fractals are supernatural or metaphysical or whatever have you. They're not. It's just that there are aspects of mathematics that are beyond the understanding of humans. That means nothing. You can find lots of things that are beyond the understanding of humans. Black holes are beyond the understanding of humans, and yet, as far as I can tell, based off of the evidence that I've seen, they probably exist. So what? Are black holes now metaphysical? Supernatural? They're not. No. It's just that the human mind is limited. And that makes sense to me.
You realize what you're appealing to is an ultimately Marxian conception of human sovereignty within the universe?
I don't believe that it's Marxian at all.
I'll explain to you how I think it's Marxian, and we can get into disagreement about this, but from my perspective, how that is Marxian is that, okay, you define something like combinatorics, like this extremely, like, divergent fractals in mathematics, and you say, well, these things are beyond human understanding, but that doesn't necessarily entail that they are metaphysical or supernatural in any way. The very fact that you capitulate that these are beyond human understanding, you as the strict materialist and epistemological thinker, the very concession that these things are beyond human understanding is in and of itself a very deftly camouflaged form of metaphysics, in case you've never realized that.
Well, I'm not sure that I agree. Let me give you a thought experiment, right? Before humans existed, there were animals that existed on the planet, here on Earth. Now, the sun rose every day, and it set every night. Now, there wasn't a gibbon, or a jaguar, or a platypus on the Earth that understood anything about the fact that the Earth circles the sun. They had no idea about that. They just knew that this big light in the sky went from east to west every night. And they didn't even know about east to west. Now, does that make the sun metaphysical, or is it just that it was beyond the understanding of those creatures that inhabited the Earth?
I would say in that particular instance, the sun would have represented a fundamental type of preeminence. It's like, before I existed, while I exist, and after I cease to exist, assuming there was anything that could have comprehended any of this at all, which we can also have a separate argument about, but going with this train of thought, the sun in isolation represented this type of eternal constant, where everything else, every other agentic aspect of nature, being born, living, and dying, was in a fundamental way separate from the eternal sunrise and sunset in this extremely predictable pattern was preeminent to any type of temporal, finite, mortal life forms that could have found themselves in the position of looking up and contemplating the sky of the day and the sky of the night.
See, to me, this is both flowery language and flowery thought born from the human mind. I don't think that any of that is true. I think that before humans, there existed an Earth that was filled with mammals. Before that, it was dinosaurs, but before humans, there was an Earth that existed... Oh, shit. God damn it. I don't know why it's doing this. One sec. Sorry. Small computer issue. I'm not going to edit this out. Whatever. But before man, there was mammals, and they existed on Earth, and there wasn't a need for any epistemology or ontology or any sort of biology. It was just animals existing on Earth, and the sun rose and the sun set. And there was no metaphysics behind that. It was just creatures that evolved on Earth, living on Earth. That was it. And in fact, even after humans arose, it's the exact same thing. We are but creatures living on Earth, living under the force, the infinite force, from our perspective, of nature. And that's it. That's all all there is to it. That's how I view the world. And you can try to think that there's different meanings that you can place behind things and different ways that you can, like, I don't know, change the semantics of words in order to make an argument happen. But at the end of the day, in my belief structure, we are animals that evolved to sentience on a rock. That's the entirety of what happened. That's it.
Well, from my perspective, like, I wouldn't entirely disagree with you that the quote-unquote sentience and higher abstract formulations of being able to put this into a whole bunch of different boxes to the point where we could talk about it in this highly complex linguistic structure that we're using right now. For most of Earth's history, that you could make a very good case that was quote-unquote unnecessary for the life forms on Earth. But I'll tell you one thing that very much did arise from this metaphysical, primordial, preeminent comprehension. Like, what you're talking about right now, it's like the sun rising and the sun setting. The tide goes in, the tide goes out, like all these...
You can't explain that.
Yeah, you can't explain that in the ultimate sense. Like, all these things happening. But I'll tell you one thing that did very much capitalize on that was just base evolutionary forces. Things that predate our quote-unquote advanced human comprehension and mindset and epistemology and ontos and whatever other else labels you want to put on this. These animals evolved eyes and evolved very specific sensory perceptual mechanisms.
And a circadian rhythm in response to the cycle of the sun.
Yeah, whether they're nocturnal or diurnal, like, all of these things are preeminent before there was even a thing remotely resembling a human mind that ever existed. Now, if that's not a preeminent metaphysical instantiation of power incarnate, that where it can have such a massive influence on the Bayesian life forms of Earth, that would put a pressure upon them. It's like, there's all this free energy that the sun spits out. If you had an organ that could detect this energy, it would be advantageous to your survival and the propagation of your genes. Why don't you evolve eyes? Now, this wasn't like a conscious, concerted effort, and this wasn't planned out. I'm not making that argument. But the argument that you and I would both agree with is like evolution worked to create things with eyes long before human brains ever existed.
Yes.
And that being said, we can like genuflect and reflect back on this in like a human sense and be like, that's what happened, and that's why that happened. It's like, but before the human mind existed, this was already happening. We just came at the tail end of this and be like, hey, there's a lot of things wandered around that have very similar organs that we could put in this epistemological classification group and cook this down mathematically. It's like percentage of things that have eyes, and what can those eyes perceive, what can't they perceive, what within this creature's environment would eyes perceiving this band of electromagnetic radiation from the sun and this other band of electromagnetic radiation from the sun, how would this be advantageous to your survival? That is like post hoc rationality. In the actual advent of the evolution, though, there was no human agency to define these things and box them up in this epistemological form. So that is evolutionarily necessary. If you are 100% secular, 100% God not real, this still stands as like preeminent metaphysics. The rising and setting of the sun itself is preeminent metaphysics incarnate.
I mean, look, I agree with you. I think that we have found ourselves on this planet after 4 billion years of evolution and about 400 million years of evolution of animal life. We have found ourselves here, and we just suddenly arose, like, in terms of geological and evolutionary time, about a second ago. And we just popped into place, and oh, wow, okay, suddenly we're here. And a lot of people, they have thought, yes, well, I know better. It's this God that I invented that did it, or it's some philosophical thing that I invented that did it, or it's some magic thing that I invented that did it. But actually, we're just a relatively smart primate that happened to be the first one to be able to think about this. And hell, we may not be the last. But that's the world that I believe that we live in. And if you want to describe that process as metaphysical, I mean, fine. I guess you can call it whatever you want. Perhaps at the end of the day, that's a semantic argument. But I don't think that there's anything that is particularly inherently special or godly or anything like that is behind this phenomenon.
I mean, if I ask you, why would you necessarily find this surprising that certain human agents throughout history, us being evolved from social primates with inbuilt instincts for the creation and recognition of dominance hierarchies, why would you necessarily find it surprising that certain human agents would, as you describe it, quote unquote, invent gods would be advantageous to their survival and propagation of their particular genetics? Why would you find any of this surprising at all?
No, I don't. I never said it was surprising, and I don't find it surprising. In fact, I would be surprised if it didn't happen. And in fact, for whatever reason, the belief in a god, at least for humans, seems to provide them with an evolutionary advantage, which is why religions have continued to exist. I mean, what's the difference between a religion and a cult? Well, a religion confers an evolutionary advantage, while a cult confers an evolutionary disadvantage. So religions stand the test of time, while cults tend to fade out. I mean, it all makes sense to me. I'm just saying, I think that we exist in a material world, but if you were to call something a god, based off of the definitions that I know, it would be the force that has existed since life on Earth existed, and it's the creationary force that made all life on Earth and also made mankind. If there were to be such a thing as a god, then the only candidate that I know of must be nature. And that is simply my position. It's a very simple position. It's actually not complicated whatsoever.
Well, I mean, nature as is, as a type of divinity, isn't necessarily anything new, mind you.
Nature is not divine. Nature is actually kind of a sociopath.
Well, okay. Here's like a problem you have. Like, when I say the word divine, just by your rebuttal right there that you said nature is kind of a sociopath and not divine, it's like you're presupposing what I mean by divine has an element of like Abrahamic omnibenevolence, which I didn't explicitly say.
All right, okay. What do you mean when you say divine? I should begin with that.
Well, divine aspects of the reality that we find ourselves in are extremely deep-seated. Like, this is why Earth worship, like Gaia worship, Sun worship, Apollonian worship, like things that are very consistent and persistent, that transcend the mortal coil. Like the sun rises and the sun sets upon generation after generations of humans, so it wouldn't be surprising that humans after a certain point are like, the sun cycle is basically eternal from our perspective. Now, I know you can make some like physics arguments like,
no, it's effectively eternal.
See, the sun is like, yeah, effectively eternal from our perspective.
Yes, I agree.
Now, just to clarify for certain skeptics in the audience that will say it's like, you see, the sun is like a finite entity that started from this process of like hydrogen.
Not on our timescales. It is eternal on our timescales.
Yeah, the timescales is like a very important part of this. Now, I want you to consider very carefully. It's like, within these timescales that we find ourselves in, it's trivially easy for us to take a great many things for granted. It's like the rising and setting of the sun is something that we can very easily take for granted. It's like, why do we take that for granted? Now, if you look into like the Neil deGrasse Tyson crew and the physics crew, it's like, well, the sun is a specific classification of star that will eventually go through this life cycle where it becomes a red giant and then eventually collapses or goes supernova or turns into a black hole or any of these other contingencies that could potentially happen in this eschatological form. It's like, there's many, many arguments and realms of scientific thought that could lead you down the process of like, well, our solar system is this like finite instance in the greater infinite expanse of the cosmos that is going to reach this eschatological terminus at some point and kill us all effectively unless we get the fuck out of here. Like, even the most ardent secular / atheistic scientists that you would ever encounter would have little to no problems with this particular train of thought that I'm on right now.
Well, yeah, I've heard the argument that, what is it, in 2 or 3 billion years, the sun will get too hot, and therefore, I guess life on Earth will be extinguished. I kind of doubt that. I think that life finds a way, and I think that life will find a way to continue to exist on Earth pretty much just before the Earth is engulfed by the sun. At that point, life will cease to exist on Earth. But Yeah, I mean there is a theoretical end to life on Earth, but given the timescales that humanity finds itself in, the fact that shit, how long have primates existed? Like maybe like 70 million years maximum. Humanity itself has existed for like maximum like maybe like 150,000 years. And we only started doing like agriculture maybe 10,000 years ago. The timescales at which humanity exists means that, I mean, fuck, like, it's not even worth thinking about the sun exploding in 2 billion years.
Okay, I think we mostly agree upon this, honestly. Um, this gets like really mentally taxing after a while, so okay. Now, I don't know if we've ever gone over this in private or in like a recorded setting, but I think we've been talking long enough now for you to sort of... You'll probably understand where I'm coming from with this, given that we've been talking for so long. Everything, like all the methodologies that you are using, and even certain things that you take for granted, like you're not a physicist, like neither am I. Like you're a biologist by trade, and I'm a transportation individual by trade. I'm much more blue collar than you are in that particular term, but that's not something that I particularly find germane to this conversation.
And
so,
yet, Breaker, I don't want to compliment you, but you're smarter than I think most of the PhDs that I've met.
Yeah, but here's the thing about that. We had this very old conversation. Maybe you remember this, and like rational empiricism in its purest form doesn't require a mathematically instantiated metaphysic. We've had this conversation before, if you remember it.
Okay. Yeah.
And there's a fundamental problem with this. Anytime you engage in a rational empiricist enterprise, whether or not you realize it in the immediate sense, you will eventually be led down this primrose path of like, I need to shore up all the incongruencies in my observations somehow.
No.
Well, we both know that there's incongruencies in your observations because you're a finite mortal being with biases.
That's right.
Okay, yeah.
So,
now you're seeing where I'm going.
No, I understand where you're going, right? But I'm thinking of the best way to put this. So I understand that there are drastic limitations to science, and in fact, it is a leap of faith to even believe in science in the first place. The idea of believing in empiricism is just as much faith-based as the idea of believing in, say, Christianity or Islam or whatever have you. If you claim to be an empiricist, then you must believe, therefore, that you can make repeatable and reliable observations upon reality, right? That's the only way that you can actually engage in empiricism. If it is actually the case that reality itself is not reliably observable, then you're in a pickle. And so all of these things are faith-based. And I accept that, right? I'm not one of these people that's going to come out and say, science is the end-all, be-all of all things. It's the only way to obtain knowledge. No, I don't agree with that. But at the end of the day, I am an empiricist. My faith is in empiricism. That's where my faith lies. One cannot do better. One must place their faith in something. If you don't place your faith in anything, then you're a goddamn postmodernist, and, well, no one wants to live like that. So, I place my faith in empiricism, and therefore, to some extent, in the scientific method. And I believe that we live on a rock that is orbiting the sun, and that we evolved to be here. That is, I guess, what my faith tells me. I can't really say... I mean, neither of us can make a truth claim about anything. I guess it's just that maybe we have different faiths. And that's all right. We can agree to disagree, or we can chat about it endlessly. Yeah, it's all good.
Okay, this is like a really subtle disconnect that happens here. And we've talked about this in the past. You, I recall, vehemently disagreed with me on this, but from what I remember, you didn't really present much of a counterfactual to what I'm about to say.
Okay.
Let's go down the road of pure secular rational empiricism. Now, at a certain point, you're going to have to ultimately admit that there has to be an inbuilt type of metaphysical groundwork to this.
Okay, let me, before I begin on this path, what do you mean precisely by metaphysical?
That which is preeminent to epistemology. Like, epistemologically speaking, if you're going to observe, it's like agent B proceeded to endpoint C, and I as agent A can make a logical inference between the progression of agent B to endpoint C.
So by metaphysics you mean human...
There is an A, B, and C there that you can claim this about.
So you're talking about human rationality and logic, basically. Is that what you're trying to say? The preeminence of human rationality and logic, that things must make sense.
When you're doing science and you're engaging in like an enterprise where you want to present a predictable and repeatable model through pure rational empiricism, your human agency A, be it flawed and incomplete and incongruent like we would both agree with, I'm not disagreeing with you there, but that agent A observing phenomenon B proceeding to endpoint C, that trialic observation of reality proper is the most fundamental baseline. There has to be an A, B, and C there. That A, B, and C doesn't necessarily need to encompass a human agency at any point along the chain. But as us humans doing science in a rational empiricist way, that's how it's going to... The default formulation for us making a rational empiricist observation of reality is going to fit into that. That is the metaphysic in science.
Right, yeah, that's the assumption. That's the thing that I have... I mean, that would be an assumption, I suppose. That
is rational empiricism itself made manifest, so if you're going to disagree with that, you better be careful.
Because I can think of instances where it is that human rationality actually gets in the way of understanding the universe, right? Like
I just said, I even gave you the caveat, like, human agent A isn't infallible. I already gave you that.
Okay, sure. For instance, right, like, when it comes to quantum mechanics, I mean, assuming that that's a real thing, I suppose I have to have that caveat, especially in this conversation. But assuming the quantum mechanics is a real thing, that's actually something that is extremely counterintuitive. It goes against, I guess, the baseline logic and reasoning of a human being. So there are instances where the universe itself does not necessarily match the evolved logic and reasoning of man, right? But otherwise, yeah, I think I can agree with you.
Well, in like the quantum sense, the main problem you have is like this is going to be a slight tangent, so this isn't going to be very robust. But just to, like, get this tangent out of the way before we pursue, like in quantum mechanics specifically, the main problem you have is like the human bias. Like there's this innate presupposition that time operates in this linear fashion. This can be evolutionarily explained by the adaptation that allows you to have spatial reasoning as a predatory social primate that is omnivorous, to throw a tool, an object that you crafted for a specific purpose, preeminent to the task that you are now operating, and you need to throw this tool or enact this tool, swing this club in a specific parabolic arc in this physical, mathematical way to hit the target that you are going to then eat. This is like the simplest way I could possibly explain this, and this would be perfectly evolutionary explicable,
right?
As an adaptation.
And within nature, unless you're unless you have like a really good arm on you, throwing a ball will not take into account Einsteinian relativity because you're probably not.
It doesn't need to.
Right,
yeah,
you're not going to be thrown at that fast unless you have a really good arm.
That's why physicists say that, like, humans, you'll hear like even like world-class physicists say this, like the human mind, evolutionarily speaking, isn't set up to take that level of complexity into account. You'll hear a lot of physicists like say this openly to your face.
Yeah,
like,
we didn't evolve with it. Yeah.
Yeah, the fucking taking into account the time dilation of the mass of the object you're throwing at the buffalo or whatever it is you're trying to fucking kill and eat isn't germane to you hitting that thing and killing it and eating it, like in this in this system.
Right. Yeah, and that's an example of how our evolved minds, even though they seem extremely logical and coherent to the wielder of said mind, we have evidence out there in the universe that shows us that actually our minds are, well, they're just evolved for Earth. They're not that good at understanding a lot of aspects of the universe. That is a limitation to the human mind. Once again, yes.
Yeah, they're the evolved, like, motor functions of a social primate that is omnivorous to perform a very specific task for a very specific outcome of killing and eating a thing at the end of the day. Yeah, that's very easy. That this is not rocket science. It's like very straightforward. The problem in like the quantum sense that you have is that on the quantum level, there's little to nothing. It becomes very, very distant from your immediate intuitive human senses of picking up object, throwing it in parabolic arc toward prey animal, or running in straight line while gazelle is zigzagging and just continuing to run until gazelle gets tired. Like, none of that is ultimately germane. It's like all that matters is like you evolve to run slower but longer than the gazelle can.
Now, here's the thing, right? Human beings, we're not really equipped to understand relativity or quantum mechanics. They're either too fast and too large, or too small and too fast.
Well, no, this is the problem. This is the main thing. It's not, that's a part of it, but it's not the most fundamental part of it. The most fundamental part of it is the perception of time. As you, as a finite temporal agent, succumbing to hunger and desire, needing to kill and eat this thing within a very small, in the grand scheme of things, time window, you need to execute all of your actions as evolutionary instantiated to do this thing within a certain amount of time. Now, on the quantum level, that time window is just like incomprehensible effectively on an intuitive level, but the way that you get around that is through like a higher level of abstraction that doesn't impinge upon your gut and
Well,
your motor functions of kill and eat thing.
right. I mean, if you're a predator, it doesn't usually make sense to catch prey at the quantum level because even if you could catch them, I mean, they're so small they wouldn't really give you much nutrient benefit. But the see, it's interesting that we're talking about this, right? Because you're correct that mankind, we're not built to understand these like forces of physics that exist outside of our evolutionary frame, right? We weren't evolved to understand relativity. We weren't evolved to understand the minute quantum mechanics. Maybe if we existed at very fast, large, or very small, tiny scales, we could have evolved to understand these things, but we didn't. Much like how we evolved in 3 dimensions, and I mean, shit, no one really can comprehend what a 4th dimension would even fucking look like. Maybe save for the Buddha because he's super enlightened. But the the interesting thing about that is that there is a mind, a quote unquote mind, that exists on Earth that can understand all of these things, right? So there are forces that exist potentially within your own mind with microtubules, if you believe certain scientists. I'm a little bit dubious, but, you know, whatever.
Roger Penrose, yes, the quantum tubules, yes.
But there, something like, say, photosystem 1 and 2 in the in the chloroplasts of plant cells when they're undergoing photosynthesis. This is actually, photosynthesis is actually quantum in nature, right? Nature can understand by whatever means. Nature can actually not only understand but perfect the exploitation of quantum mechanics. I bet that if you shoved nature into a place where it had to go really fast or be very large, it would be able to exploit the Einsteinian relativity mechanics. And you know what else I bet? I bet that if you expanded nature from existing in 3 spatial dimensions to 4 spatial dimensions, it would also do just fine, because it works on very simple principles, right? A human would be completely lost in a 4 spatial dimensional universe. But I believe that if you introduce nature to that same universe and you had some replicators, I think it would take right off. And it would be able to make a creature, a series of creatures, a series of species, an ecosystem that could thrive in that sort of environment.
You've gotten strangely close to this in a weird way, because when you say it's like plants' exploitation of photosynthesis to produce energy in that particular way, it's like there's a reason that you and I don't comprehend the true organic nuances of photosynthesis, because we can just eat the plant. Like, I know this will sound kind of stupid and hokey and weird, but just follow me for a minute. Like, the plant has already done everything you just described, so we're just walking around as these mammalian engines of caloric intake, and we just see a plant. Now, the plant has done this, like, interlocution with the cosmos and figured out photosynthesis and microtubules and the quantum relations between, like, photons and through its freaking leaves absorbing in photosynthesis. Like, it's already done a lot of the heavy lifting. So at the end of the day, all we do is just like, hey, there's a plant growing over there. I'm going to eat that motherfucker. And the plant isn't going to do anything to stop you. That's the difference. The plant already did that heavy lifting on that level, and all you do is just like, what color is the plant? What's it smell like? It's like you have this inbuilt evolutionary thing. It's like, ugh, this is really sour and bitter. It's like you have all these like taste senses. Like certain plants are poisonous to humans, so it's like that plant looks kind of weird. I don't know about that, but that plant looks kind of good. I think I enjoy that.
Right.
And this isn't 100% exact science, and sometimes a human might die eating a certain plant. It's like, wow, that berry is really brightly colored. I bet it's good. But then they eat the berry, and it's like, oh no, that berry is poison. And then all the other social primate humans around, it's like, hey, Joe Bob over there ate the berry from that neon magenta plant. That neon magenta plant is bad because it killed Jim Bob. Avoid that plant.
No, see, given what nature is capable of, right? I mean, I just said that I think that a human being would be hard pressed to understand a fourth spatial dimension, but I think that nature, if you like, just shoved it in there.
I think most things in nature actually do understand that.
But I don't think so. But if you shoved nature in, and nature fundamentally here is just the process of natural selection, the force of natural selection. If you took the force of natural selection, which I am calling here nature, and you shoved it into some sort of new world that had four spatial dimensions, then I think it would do just fine. I think it would be able to create new species that were able to thrive in this totally bizarre environment that human beings would just, I mean, we wouldn't be able to survive in. It would be way too fucking weird. But that's the sort of thing that nature here is capable of dealing with. Now, in that instance, when you look at that fact, I think that you have to consider a couple things. One of the things is, well, shit. When it comes to, I don't know, dealing with the universe, which do you actually trust more? Do you trust the guidance of where natural selection is nature, where natural selection is kind of shoving you towards? Or do you trust the words of your fellow man, right? And so in this instance, I'm more inclined to say, yeah, shit, man. Nature is way more powerful than we are, and it's way better able to adapt to any scenario than we can. And so, for my own benefit, I would rather follow nature than follow my fellow man. I believe that it just makes sense, because my fellow man, I mean, neither are infallible, neither are omniscient, neither are omnipotent, but one of them is a universal force and nature, and then the other is just a kind of a planetary force, and that's man.
Here's the problem with that. Like, no one leaves the guild. Like, you are not apart from nature. You are a part of nature. Period, at the end of the day. Now, let's take what you just said on its face. And let me take you, and I'll just pick you out of wherever you live right now and just plop you in a random location around the globe. Let's say I plop you in an Amazonian rainforest, completely naked.
Oh, probably.
And
die.
I just say, okay, well, yeah, but you see, you understand this, but I'll explain it for like the audience. Like, okay, it's like, okay, Mister, I trust nature above all else, above my fellow man. I'm just going to take you as individual human in isolation, plop you down the Amazon, and say go. Now, you're going to find immediately that there's all types of like plants and animals everywhere around you. Now, without any influence from your quote-unquote fellow man, I want you to just like go. It's just like the next thing you see, eat. What do you think your chances are of surviving that?
But Breaker, I'm not saying. I mean, look, we evolved from nature's infinite wisdom.
We are social primates. Our fellow man is the part of nature that keeps us alive.
Of course. We no man is an island. We are not tigers that can subsist by ourselves. we rely on our fellow men. I agree with you 100%. And
Well,
that's the
it's
hold on,
strange that you
hold
bring
on,
up
hold on,
tigers
hold on,
because the
hold on,
tiger has a
Rager,
very
hold on for
specific
just a
thing.
second. That is the state of mankind. I agree. We must rely upon each other, right? Especially for knowledge and wisdom about the world that we exist in. But when it comes to things that are at the ultimate like peak of human knowledge, where it's so far up there, like talking about quantum mechanics or talking about Einsteinian relativity or beyond that, right? When it comes to the peak of understanding, when it comes to the bridge where we can't really understand things anymore, well, that is where I think that you can no longer rely upon your fellow man. You have to look towards nature. And by the way, when you look at AI and how we're actually doing AI nowadays, this is actually exactly what has been done. Do you think that the way that Stockfish was defeated by AlphaGo, not AlphaGo, one of the alphas, do you think that was done because a whole bunch of human mathematicians talked to one another and they were able to outthink the algorithms of Stockfish and produce better algorithms? No, not at all. In fact,
The algorithms are alive.
human beings decided, you know what? We're not smart enough to actually be able to solve chess. So what they did was they allowed nature to do some Darwinian finicking, and they created Alpha Zero is what it was. They created Alpha Zero, and Alpha Zero was evolved. It was grown. It wasn't built. It was grown. They grew Alpha Zero, and they used evolutionary Darwinian mechanics, and then it completely beat the shit out of Stockfish, right? That's an instance where human beings decided, you know what? As smart as we are at mathematics, if we just use the divine wisdom of nature for like 6 weeks, then we can train an algorithm that can beat the best that humanity has to offer. And they did it. And no one knows how Alpha Zero works. Not a single person on the planet, even those who engineered the damn thing. No one knows how it works, but god fucking damn it, it works. This is a physical example right here, right now, that proves that nature is so much fucking smarter than humans and so much more adaptable. And by the way, this force that we have used to create Alpha Zero, this is the same force that made us. Now, this is not an omnipotent god. It's not an omniscient god. Fucking A. For all intents and purposes, compared to humans, this seems like a goddamn god.
I'm kind of curious as to why, given what you just said, why isn't this particular quote-unquote god omniscient? Because you literally described something that no individual human or group of humans could ever sit down and be like, okay, let's figure out exactly what the fuck happened here. It's like, you've literally described something that can beat the most prolific of human chess players that has ever lived, that has spent most of their life engaging with other humans, specifically in the specific game of chess, over decades of their life, sometimes in a collective sense, like multiple human chess masters, centuries of aggregate time spending playing chess with humans.
Because if I can beat a dog at chess, that doesn't make me omniscient. It just makes me smarter.
So there is like this type of finite cutoff threshold of human understanding. I think this is the main problem between you and me, I think, at the end of the day. Because I am in the position where I can appreciate and recognize, not that I can comprehend, the infinite and the transcendental. And you're in the position, it's just like, well, all I can say about this is like it might be ever so slightly smarter than me, but I can't tell you why. But the maximum I can say about it is it's like 1 or 2 points of deviation away from me in a way that I cannot totally comprehend and appreciate.
No. Not 1 or 2 points. Many points. It's like the difference between an ant and a human, honestly. But
specifically these AIs and this specific tasks of like chess, it's like,
in this
consider like, how much of your life is taken up by chess and AI algorithms and like
when it comes to nature, natural selection, the evolutionary process itself, it's not just 1 or 2 points smarter than me. It's like aggressively smarter than me. It doesn't make it omniscient, but it's like the difference between a human and an ant, right? The ant looks at a human and it thinks, I mean, if it could think, it would go, oh my god, that's God. And a human looks at an ant and it goes, yeah, I'm just chilling. I'm just doing my thing. I'm not God.
I don't know. What is your reticence, though? What is this hesitation? What is this reticence of yours to say it's like, I know this thing is not all-knowing, even though for all intents and purposes, in every appreciable way that I can measure it, it's smarter than me at every turn. What is this end-of-the-road reticence that you have against like this being quote-unquote all-knowing? How can you say that?
Because I don't believe that it is all-knowing. In fact, how...
You don't believe that it is all-knowing, but how do you empirically know it's not?
Well, I can't know anything for certain, but I can be pretty confident in that ultimately, the length of DNA that it's working with is not infinitely long. Ergo, it cannot have infinite information, right? It is limited. It's just that
I think that's a cop-out.
No, it's not a cop-out. This is what I'm saying. We're dealing with a force that is much smarter and more powerful than us, that we as humans are necessarily enslaved to. But that's just it's a greater entity. That doesn't mean that it's all powerful. That doesn't mean it's omniscient. It's just much greater than us. It's like I was saying, if an ant were to encounter a human, it's like, I mean, you're much smarter than an ant. You're much bigger and stronger and more powerful, and you could crush it if you wanted to, or you could choose not to crush it, and you can divine mathematics while the ant literally has no idea what the fuck mathematics is. But that doesn't make you a god. It doesn't make you omniscient. It just makes you bigger and more powerful. That's what nature is to us. It's way, way, way more powerful than us and way smarter. But it's not God. It's not a Christian version of God, let me say. Like, I would call it a god in that it appears to be the most powerful thing that we interact with aside from, I don't know, entropy or like the universe itself. But I don't know. Yeah.
Every time I hear you say this, like more and more these days, every time I hear that, I think of like a Marxian conception.
Nothing that I'm saying is Marxian whatsoever.
Okay, here, pay very close attention to me.
Okay.
Now follow along with this.
All right.
Okay. You say that I know this thing that is effectively orders of magnitude smarter, more clever, more in line with a specific aspect of nature that I currently do not or may never not understand is. I realize this thing is more powerful, but it's not God. You can say at the end of all of these interlocutions of yours that it is not God. Now, pay very close attention to this. This means that you have this preconceived, almost like farcical and comedic notion of what a god actually would be if you encountered it. Therefore, empirically, you could say it's like, with my conception of what a god should be, this isn't it.
Okay, if
What is the God that should be in your head that everything through your empirical locutions with reality tell you that's not the God? What is the God in your head that if you were to find, you would have to necessarily say is the God?
okay, I would begin by saying that I mean, is it just for the cow to think that the farmer is God?
Well, now we're bringing in the concept of justice, and I'd be like,
All right, fine. It doesn't have to be just. Is it
insofar
wise?
as
Is it
no,
wise for
let's
the
go
cow?
with that. Let's go with that. Let's go with the concept of justice. Like, is it just to think that the farmer is God from the cow's perspective? Is like, as far as the cow is concerned, like everything else that it knows to like evolutionarily on a deep natural level to avoid and be mortally terrified of, it encounters orders of magnitude less of those instances when in the presence of the farmer than it does in the presence of the wolf.
Right. The farmer is actually the savior of the cow from the wolf and whatever else
Ultimate sense,
rotate upon
the
it.
cow, in an esoteric sense, the cow, the wolf and the farmer are the same exact entity in an ultimate sense. It's just that the farmer is a lot easier and slower and plotting and more methodical about it, but they're both going to do the same thing. The wolf is going to eat the cow. The farmer is going to eat the cow at the end of the day. The farmer is going to haul the cow up by its back legs and slit its throat. And the wolf is going to chase after the cow, and the cow is going to scream in terror. It's like, ah, it's a wolf, flee for your lives. But with the farmer, it's going to be like, hey, I'm going on a nice, pleasant shoot towards this. Oh, I'm being hauled up by a back. What's this? And it's going to die. But with the wolf, it's going to be like, oh no, for the love of God, please save me. Oh God, the fucking wolf.
Well, right. I think that the question of what is a god is a very interesting question, right? So, and when it comes to the perspective of the cow, perhaps it thinks of the farmer as being a god. Because, I mean, shit. The farmer controls its entire life. The farmer decides when it lives and dies. From a certain perspective, the farmer was the creator of the cow. Because the farmer pulled the calf out of the ginormous vagina of the mother cow, right? So, from the perspective of the cow, maybe the farmer is God. But the farmer is not God. The farmer is just a farmer, right? So it is possible to live in a reality where there are things that are much larger and much more magnificent and stronger and smarter and powerful than you are. And yet that is not a god. It is simply an entity that is bigger and stronger than you are. And I don't know if it's wise to go around calling anything that's more powerful than you a god, in the same way that it doesn't make sense for an ant or a cow to call a human god just because they're more powerful than them. That's what I'm saying. Nature is not a traditional god in, I guess mostly the Abrahamic sense, right? But in the sense that, are there entities that are finite, but much more powerful than we are? Well, those do exist. And if you want to call that a god, then yes, fine. Yeah, we can call that a god, in which case nature is the best candidate for that sort of god.
This is why, like in my poem, if you remember, I think you've read it on a previous episode.
Of course,
It's
I remember.
yeah, the black blood is the naturalist pantheist form of like the ultimate god is the god of consumption. Because what I've been hearing from you, specifically with the cow example, and it's a lot deeper than just this single example, but for the purpose of this particular conversation, it's like there's this constant notion of ulterior motive.
I have that poem up if you want me to read it again, by the way.
You could read the specific, like the black blood part, so that everyone is up on it.
Yeah, okay. Here we go. The living triad of eternal law. I am the blood, the instinct, the essence of all existence, the animator, the animated, the subject, and the object. No other sees where I see, no other moves where I move, no other is where I am. It is I who see, you are but eyes. It is I who move, you are but limbs. It is I who think, you are but minds. All offspring are mine, you are but a vessel. All elucidation is mine, you are but lucid. All animation is mine, you are but animated. I am the origin, you are the originator. No thing is without me, all things are within me. The black blood of the eternal hidden night. Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, but and I know that you're very when you read that you were like very on board with that. You like that really resonated with you. I want you to pay very close attention to that, because what that is describing, like with our example of like from cow's perspective, farmer is a much more benevolent god and master than wolf is. What you just described there in the ultimate metaphysical sense is the nature god in its purest sense, which is the ultimate consumer, the ultimate devourer of all proximal energies.
Yes,
the ultimate absorber, the ultimate greed, the ultimate seat of all things. Everything is within me, nothing is without me.
But also the ultimate grower, the ultimate creator. All of these things as well.
Well, growth and creation are only like, now, pay very close attention to that, because in that poem, I'm talking in like very essentialist terms.
I'm not talking about the poem. What I'm saying is that objectively, if you're saying that nature is the devourer, the eater, well, yes, that's true, but it's also the grower and the creator. It is all of these things simultaneously. It does all
Here's
of these things.
Here's the thing, though. The growth and the creation and the relinquishing, that's the relinquisher's duty, because where we find ourselves as humans. Because when I wrote that poem, that's a very theological and essentialist perspective. The nature side of it is always going to be devouring and consuming. It's like the most fundamental biological organisms, when they actually reproduce and propagate into the future, because us as biological agents are temporal and finite, they effectively die. Like at the most Bayesian level of cell division, like when the cell divides, the previous instance of it dies. That's why the cell is dividing. In that sense that I wrote that poem, that is without temporal constraint. That is the most essentialized, eternal, everlasting form of it. The eternal devourer that relinquishes nothing ever. The relinquishing aspect of it is when bounded in finite time as a finite biological being, like you and I are DNA-based replicators, that's where relinquishing starts to necessarily happen, or we as genetic instances of a biological continuum of organisms would necessarily go extinct if there was not a relinquishing and a growing and a reproduction. You see, when I wrote that, if nature were eternal and ever-present and unchanging, it would only ever devour and consume and relinquish nothing. The relinquishing the reproductive act is fundamentally an act of sacrifice and yielding and surrender.
I believe that it is only man that believes in the eternal, that believes in the ultimate, that believes in the extremes of the infinite.
No, it doesn't. No, that's not correct.
Hold on. No, I believe that this is true. I believe that it's the conception of man to believe in the infinite, the omniscient, the omnipotent, the never-ending, the ageless,
the everlasting.
Right. I believe that this is the conception of mankind. I believe that, in fact, if you look towards nature itself, it's much grander, it's much smarter than us, but I don't believe it has ever really tried to make a move at being omnipotent or infinite in any degree. I think that this is I don't know if this is the correct word, but this is the schizophrenia of man, to believe in these infinities. They don't exist.
And that would be perfectly normal and natural for you as a finite creature bounded in DNA-based instincts to propagate your genes into the future and reproduce, because you yourself are a finite temporal being that is going to die. And if you don't propagate your genes, you die in an absolute sense.
Here's the thing, right?
But something that is essentially...
Hold on. If I am, let's say, not eternal, if I am finite and I am destined to die, was I not made in the image of my creator?
Well, if you're going to get very Abrahamic about it, I don't know how much of that you believe or can fully comprehend, but yes, as a matter of fact, you were made in the image of the creator in a weird sort of way. But here's the thing: your ultimate creator isn't bound by the constraints of temporality that you as an instance of it are. You are mortal and finite, and you must engage with other points of the trialic unity, the eternal triad. You must, as something bound in linear time in this journeying progression, you must yield at certain key points in this reproductive reciprocal way. You cannot fully indulge in the absolute nature of nature proper in the most essential sense because you're mortal. You will die. Because you will die, you must necessarily reproduce and propagate into the future. This is your nature to do so. Even though you're made in the image and likeness of Nature God is far above you in a transcendental way that is this eternal, immortal transformation that you as an instance of it do not fully partake in. You only partake in it briefly towards your ultimate eschatological endpoint, just like the ultimate judgment for you is, did you reproduce successfully or did you not? That is the ultimate binary. If you did not, fuck you, extinct. If you did, your genes propagate into the future because you're mortal. Nature, in an absolute essential sense, doesn't have that constraint of temporality.
Even nature one day will die. The universe ultimately is inhospitable to nature. Right now it's quite hospitable, but ultimately it will become inhospitable. Even nature itself will die. It will not outlive the universe. I mean, I guess unless we somehow create a wormhole into another universe in this extremely high-fashion sci-fi concept. But
now you're assuming. Now, pay attention to me. You're assuming a type of eschatological, Abrahamic, defined teleology, eschatology endpoint.
No, what I'm saying is that what I know about nature is that as powerful and intelligent as a force as it might be, shit, do you see any nature on Mars? It's confined to Earth. Its powers are limited, and perhaps through humans, it will be able to spread throughout the galaxy. That's what I hope. I would like to spread the nature god to Mars, to Jupiter, to Europa, right? I would like to spread it to Alpha Centauri. I would like to spread it throughout the galaxy. That would be amazing.
Well, here's
hold
the
on,
thing,
hold
though.
on, breaker. But ultimately, it doesn't matter how far we spread it. Eventually, we all know the universe will eventually suffer heat death, and nature will end. It dies like all things. Just like how both an ant and a human will die, both a human and nature itself will die, and that is acceptable. That's just the way of the universe. But, Breaker, I will give you the last word. But I think that we can wrap this up here. I think we've talked this out pretty well. Go ahead.
Well, here's the thing about that specifically. Like, to put a capstone on this. At the end of all this, from my perspective, like what you were alluding to with like your version of nature God is just an instance, an avatar of the more transcendental form of the nature God that me and my poem that I was alluding to. It's like earth-bounded nature in this carbon-based, DNA-based life form sense. You as a lesser avatar and instance of that particular instantiation of nature God, it's perfectly natural and organic that you would think in that way. But in the ultimate transcendental sense, the very nature of the universe itself, like you alluded to, will ultimately yield to a form of penultimate relinquishing, and that's when the whole thing starts back again. If you have this sense of like a temporally bounded, finite, eschatological telos, and then eschaton endpoint, beginning and end, that would make perfect sense. But in the ultimate sense of things, me as the panpsychist, pan-universalist, esoteric-minded person, I see it as more of like a cyclic reformulation, where at the end of like when the nature of the universe itself and the black blood, the distance between the stars, relinquishes back unto itself, that's when the whole thing kicks off again.
Actually, yes, I like the final message, and in fact, I'll agree with you. This instance of nature that is on the Earth, it is finite, but when it comes to the concept of natural selection, the idea that all you need is a very simple rule set with the correct parameters in the environment, you have some sort of a genetic change, and also you have selection for organisms that are better able to make more copies of themselves. In that idea, I would agree with you. In fact, natural selection appears to be something that is built right in to the physics and the mathematics of the universe itself. Natural selection exists at that level, and if that is what nature is, well, in that case, shit, perhaps it is timeless. Perhaps that is something that exists potentially in all universes that could exist forever. And in that case, fucking A, nature itself really is a god. And the nature that exists here on Earth is just a demigod representation of this truly larger god. This incredibly powerful god that exists at the same, perhaps even a grander level than entropy itself, that could exist in all universes. And fucking A, that is, that's a neat thought. I like that. But with that, I think that's an excellent place to bring the conversation to a close. If you've been listening to the Promethean Tides podcast, then you know that this is but a continuing conversation between Breaker and I, and we will inevitably get into this again and explore it further, as we always do, as we actually have been doing for past few years now, because we are old. With that, once again, thank you for listening. Remember to like and subscribe if you enjoy what we're doing on the channel. It would benefit us. We need your likes and your subscribes to exist in this ecosystem, because there are grand evolutionary forces at work, and you must help us in this survival area. So with that, peace out, and Breaker.
Come on, man. Like, if you don't like, share, and subscribe, like, Corn Pop is a bad dude. He's going to take you out behind the woodshed, and you're not going to want to know what happens beyond that point. It's like, the thing, America.
Peace out.